You're listening to Speaking of Faith with Bishop DeDe Duncan Proby of the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York. I'm Rachel Ravelette, or Romcom, and we're glad you're here.
Welcome, friends, to Speaking of Faith, our podcast, my podcast here in the Diocese of Central New York. I'm DeDe Duncan Proby, the Bishop of Central New York in the Episcopal Church. That, if you're wondering where Central New York is, it's from the Canadian border to Pennsylvania, Utica to Elmira, and all the space in between. I'm joined by Rachel Ravelette, our communications director, and today's topic about faith, I want to speak about guns. Now, you may think that what I'm about to say is being opposed to all guns, and that would be false. I actually grew up with guns. I've shot guns. I understand the sport and the culture. I have family members who hunt, and I think it's really important when we have conversations, especially as people of faith, that we start first with Scripture, and then we seek to hear and understand each other's perspective. The issues around gun violence in America are complex and multivalent. There are issues that are not easy to parse, and yet our common narrative, both in the church and outside, is binary, is one, either you're for or against, either whose side are you on, is how we tend to have this conversation. So when we speak of faith, especially in this podcast, I invite us to be people of curiosity, to be people of great intentionality about listening, and most of all, to be people of faith who are seeking to follow the way of Jesus. And so we seek truth in this conversation. In thinking about how to enter into a conversation about guns and gun violence in our society, I want to first acknowledge that in this diocese, we have had a tragedy. A young child, a 13-year-old, shot by police officers. And this is one of those places where already, dear listener, you're probably thinking, oh, what are they going to say? We need to stop taking sides and recognize that this is a tragedy for the police officers, and this is especially for a tragedy for Naya and his family and the Karen population in Utica. This is heartrending. None of us wants 13-year-olds to be harmed in our city streets. We have a shared interest in the well-being for all of our children. And for the Karen population in Utica who's sorrowing right now, they deserve our respect and our love and our care. The same is similar. I would not say same because there's more power. With the Karen population in Utica, there's great vulnerability. With the police, there's also great vulnerability. Those who are in law enforcement, who are seeking to keep our society safe, and who at times are themselves unsafe, and at times may be unaware of how they're contributing to a lack of safety. Complex issues. So in this opportunity, speaking of faith, we're going to talk about our differences with respect in this place. So welcome wherever you are, whatever your opinions are about gun safety, gun violence, whatever your opinions may be about faith, whether you're Christian or not. Welcome to this curious space where we listen and seek to understand and speak truth. I want to root our conversation in Romans 12, verses 9 and following, because I think when we enter into these conversations, we need to know where to start. What is our kind of baseline? How are we going to talk to each other in ways that are respectful and truthful, but also draw us to an ability to hear and speak to one another? So let me read from Romans chapter 12, beginning at verse 9. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal. Be ardent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Extend hospitality to strangers. I've ended at verse 13. I'm going to continue in a second, but I want to note these are positives. These are do these things, show honor, work for the benefit of one another, come together with a mutual understanding of mutual benefit. So, in this conversation about gun violence, what we often do is we rush to positions. I'm going to take this position, someone else takes another. What I'm inviting us to do is to come with a common interest of building a space in between where our mutual interests can be honored, where we can speak about what it is we're hoping for, what it is we want to avoid without falling into the trap of taking positions, because taking those positions are traps. Now, here Paul is wonderful. Paul starts out with do this, and then he transitions to and don't do these things. So at verse 14, he does continue with this is positive here, but notice when it shifts to do this, but don't do that. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not, here we go, do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, so far as depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. No, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. I love that last verse where he's do these things, but don't do these things. And then he ends with, do not do this, but do this. So guns. So let me start by talking about my own biases. I was raised around guns. I was raised knowing how to shoot guns. My father was very intentional in saying that until we could clean a gun and until we could keep a gun safely, we could not shoot a gun. So I remember very much sitting and taking apart a 22 and cleaning the barrel and doing all of that, putting it back together, and then going out to shoot at cans on a fence. Now, I will admit that when I first put the gun back together, went out to shoot cans on the fence, I was a little nervous that I had done it correctly. But my dad was watching over, and of course, it all went well, and we shot at cans. I also had relatives and still do who hunt and who love to go hunting. So we had both 22s, shotguns, and my father for a brief time was a sheriff in Fort Worth, and so he also had a handgun. Now, back in these days, this is a long time ago, gun safety and especially gun storage was not a big topic. It was assumed that if a gun was in the house, the people in the house knew how to use it, that it was put in a particular place, and that you didn't mess with it. It also was assumed that the bullets would be kept separate from the guns. Guns were not stored loaded. The bullets would be placed in another place. And we were expected to understand how to conduct ourselves around guns. We would go out and shoot skeet. I one time notably went on a dove hunt. I will confess, Rachel knows this, that I was fired from this particular sport because, birds flew overhead and what I saw were birds. We're here to shoot birds. So I shot at them, and it turns out one of them was a state bird, which happily, because I wasn't a very good shot with a shotgun, yes. But I quickly was told not to shoot in the air anymore. But and then when I was in my mid-teens to late teens, probably 17, 18-ish, I worked at a store called Best in Hurst, Texas. Not Best Buy. It was just called Best. And I was in the sports department where we had guns. And so I actually have sold guns to people for sport, for hunting, for skeet shooting, for competition. We did not have weapons of war or things like that. There were no AR-15s at that moment, of course. We had mostly shotguns. We had mostly 22s and some handguns. There was one particular 22 I remember distinctly thinking, when I get older, I would love to have that gun because I loved shooting skeet and I loved the sport of shooting at targets. Again, I was not very good at this, but I enjoyed the sport of it.
But it was part of the culture. It was part of how you were brought up. It was just
it was, and the idea that that safety first was absolutely part of it. And my feeling still to this day is what we want is safety. And this unfortunate binary that exists that either you love guns or you want to take them all. You either are into guns or you hate them is an artificial narrative. I don't currently own a gun. And I will also say that needs to be said. I don't have a gun in my home. I'm not a hunter. I don't have time to shoot at targets, really. But also, it's not just, as I've grown up, it's something I appreciate. It's just not something that's an interest of mine. If I lived in the country and I had livestock and I needed to protect them, that would make that different. But what would also be different from when I grew up is how the guns are stored. There would be a lock cabinet. There would be, great detail to gun locks and all of the things that are necessary to ensure that the guns are only utilized for the appropriate purpose and that protect the people in the home. And that's a very important aspect here, is to recognize that guns kill. They can kill animals and clearly can kill humans. And so
we see it with accidents all the time, where they're not stored correctly and tragic things happen. So yeah,
absolutely. Because the statistics, and we can talk about this all day because these statistics, yes, they don't totally tell the truth. But the statistic is that you're 50% more likely to be killed by a gun if you have guns in your home. Now, granted, some of those deaths are people who don't know how to handle the gun, them not being stored correctly. And then, of course, the most tragic are when someone feels there's someone breaking in and they don't recognize a loved one. And those are horrific, tragic stories. There are also other tragic stories, people who drink and drive, people who slip in the bathroom. Life has risks with it. And so it's artificial to say all of the risks are if you have guns. But it also is disingenuous to say, oh, well, I have guns, but that doesn't put anyone at risk. We have to recognize, again, these are complex issues. Now, I'm going to move on, but I also think that we may want to have more opportunities for discussion about gun violence and gun safety. I do want to definitely in this podcast stop and mention, if you own guns, please have the appropriate gun locks and the appropriate ways of storing. And then I also encourage people, if you've never taken a class of like shooting and handling guns, or been part of a club that sort of advocates for gun safety, I really encourage anyone who has guns to take the time to pay attention to how you handle them, because there's a lot of really great ways to ensure the safety of you and the people around you. I also want to make mention that this is a racial issue. There's an intersectionality between poverty, race, and gun violence. There is also a need for people in certain places and situations to have the ability to protect themselves, because they live in a place where gun safety takes on a lot of different meanings. All of these issues are complex. Nothing I'm saying in this podcast is either what I would say is binary or mutually exclusive. It is hard to sort out the complexity that is gun violence in America. And so I think as people of faith, and especially with this reading from Paul in Romans, to pay attention to how we are part of helping one another, how we are part of mutual affection, how we are working to pray for our enemies and do the things we need to do to ensure the safety of one another. Now, finally, in this podcast, I want to talk about the tragedy that happened in Utica. Naya, this young man 13 years old, and his encounter with the police. Today, in this place, in Utica, in central New York, and in America, law enforcement officers and personnel are grieving this encounter. They are grieving with the family and with the Karen population at the horror that a 13-year-old would be shot in the street. And we need to talk about what does it mean to be in this place in this time and ensure the safety of all people, and including the safety of the police officers. My hope for us as people of faith in central New York is that we will have good conversations that bring us together, that we will respect our differences, but continue to work for the safety and benefit of one another, and that we do not forget that a young child was killed this week and bringing horror to a family. And there's so many ways that death and that killing could be prevented, and all of us are part of ensuring that we do something about it. It is not helpful for us to villainize others. This is not an opportunity to suddenly talk about something we haven't been talking about. I've talked about gun violence and gun safety the whole of my bishopric. And I've been a part of the Bishops United Against Gun Violence, not against guns. I'm not against people owning guns. I'm not against the sport of guns. As I said earlier, I have been part of that culture and have had fun. Shooting skeet is great fun. Shooting at targets is great fun. And going hunting is a matter of survival for many, many people. And it is a very ecological way of having food sustainability, is to encourage healthy populations of deer, to make sure there's not overpopulation, to make sure that people are able to have access to food and to grow their own food, and to be climate savvy about the ways in which sustainable living are ecologically sustainable. All of these things are goods and can be, and at the heart of this conversation today is a sorrow. For the Karen community, we see you and we weep with you. It is tragic that this weekend we will be celebrating the life of Naya, but it is also joyful of the blessing of Naya. But it is a heart-weary thing that to see our children be shot. It is a heart-weary thing for the police officers who are living with the guilt and the self-recrimination and the worry about what could I have done and how did I do this and what needs to be done next time. These are not binary things. So I encourage each of us, dear listener, to stop with our judgment of the other and to remember these words of Paul, to once again turn our thoughts and our conversations that we do not overcome evil with evil, but overcome evil with good, that we are part of speaking to the health and sanctity of life, that we are part of and engaged with gun owners, non-gun owners, people who love guns, people who hate guns. All of us together are part of a healing in coming together with respect for one another, that we not overcome evil by further alienating, but we overcome evil by learning and listening and speaking truth to one another and hearing truth. We'll have more podcasts about gun violence and gun safety because it is something that I particularly have a heart for, because I feel like I can understand the complexity. I know what it is to enjoy shooting guns, and I know what it is to not want anyone else to be harmed by guns. As a mother, I'm horrified by a 13-year-old being shot. And as someone who's worked with police officers in different municipalities, I have great respect for our law enforcement and recognize that their dedication to trying to protect and serve at times when it is so impossible and so fraught with harm for them and for all around them. So as we end this podcast, I want to read again what Paul tells us, because I think it is helpful to remind ourselves, in the midst of all this sorrow and tragedy, where do we begin? And I think Paul helps us here. Let us begin here. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal. Be ardent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Extend hospitality to strangers. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. May we continue to speak words of blessing, of hope, and of peace. And may we find harmony in living with one another. Blessings to you, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thanks for joining us. Speaking of Faith with Bishop DeDe is a production of the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York. Our theme music is by Fleece Mob, and it's called A Bird in Hand. We use it with permission. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast through your favorite podcasting app so that you can be the first to know when new episodes are available. If you like what you've heard here, please leave us a rating and review. If you don't like what you've heard here, we're sure you're still a wonderful person, but maybe don't leave us a review? Just kidding. We love honest feedback and questions. You can connect with us online between episodes at cnyepiscopal.org/podcast and on social media at CNY Episcopal. Blessings to you, friends.